Working together, we can and will make them better.
cspan.org/The Contenders.
On the Senate returning next from their weekly party lunches, again the pending work on the Senate floor is consideration of a judicial nomination for the 11th Circuit Appeals Court in Atlanta. Live coverage of the Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Senator from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to recognize an important milestone in our nation's history. On February 14, 1912, Arizona officially became the 48th member of these 50 United States. I'm proud to salute my home state on this, her centennial celebration. Yes, we were the last of the contiguous 48 states to join, but we were certainly not the least of them. And today I'd like to tell you just a little bit about why I say that's so. Arizona is not the largest or the oldest member of the Union. It did not participate in the Revolutionary War. It doesn't border on an ocean or on the Great Lakes. And the Declaration of Independence and Constitution do not bear a single Arizonan signature. And yet there's something about Arizona that is great, something that truly sets the Grand Canyon state apart from the rest. The Grand Canyon, of course, comes to mind. I'd like to quote one of America's most famous explorers, John Wesley Powell, who once said, and I quote, "The wonders of the Grand Canyon cannot be adequately represented in symbols of speech, nor by speech itself. The resources of the graphic art are taxed beyond their powers in attempting to portray its features. Language and illustration combined must fail." Mr. President, I agree. I've hiked the Grand Canyon. I've seen it from above. I've seen it from below. And words literally cannot describe its power or its beauty. That's why every year millions of tourists come from all corners of our nation and all across the Atlantic and across the Pacific to experience the majesty that we're fortunate enough to have right there in our own backyard. But as big as it is, the Grand Canyon is just a small part of the Arizona story. There are the Sedona Red Rocks, the beautiful White Mountains, the Painted Desert, Petrified Forest, Monument Valley, Saguaro National Park, the 12,000-foot San Francisco Peaks, and countless other natural wonders that span across our deserts and through our forests. There are almost 4,000 peaks and summits in our state alone. Arizona is also home to man-made marvels, including innovative projects that have allowed much-needed fresh water to flow to our communities. These include Hoover Dam, the Glen Canyon Dam, the Central Arizona Project, the Salt River Project, and its keystone element, the Theodore Roosevelt Dam. Arizonans share the land with owls, ocelots, and eagles, jaguars, lots of rattlesnakes, and falcons. Our landscape is foliated not just with agave and cacti, but with majestic aspen, fir, spruce, and the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world. And we're rich in natural resources. From an early age, all Arizonans learn about the state's 5 C's: copper, cattle, cotton, citrus, and climate. Copper, the mineral that attracted many Arizonans to our state in the first place. It's been used by American Indians in tool and weapon making for centuries. Today, Arizona produces more copper than every other state combined, and it's now being used to develop the alternative energy technologies and vehicles of tomorrow. Cattle. Along with sheep and hogs, the ranching of cattle is deeply imprinted on our state's cowboy culture and continues to help drive our economy today. Cotton, one of our most important cash crops at the turn of the last century, cotton is still an important industry in our state. This crop, including our very own Pima long staple variety, is used to produce the clothing, fertilizer, fuel, and cooking oil used by millions of Americans every day. Citrus, the harvesting of fruits like lemons and oranges, is one of the important elements of Arizona's agricultural industry, with a history that runs deep in our state. We now export about $40 million in fruits and preparations every year. And climate. Arizona mornings are warm and filled with sunshine, and our sunsets are the best anywhere. We may not always have a white Christmas, but we do have a booming tourism industry that attracts nearly 37 million, we call them snowbirds, conservationists, and adventurers every year. These 5 C's, along with the natural treasures I mentioned earlier, are the physical expression of our state motto, Dit Dat Deos, or God enriches. Because of this, Arizonans are fiercely protective of the ecological riches that exist around them. We honor nature for its beauty, but we also respect it for its power. I don't need to tell you about Arizona's heat. Some of my colleagues in this chamber are known to complain when it reaches 80 degrees in Washington. Well, we Arizonans start to get warm when the mercury hits 120. It gets cold at night, too. In fact, Arizona can yield the nation's highest and lowest temperatures in the very same day. And there are forest fires. Last summer we saw the largest such fire in our history. The Wallow Mega Fire burned more than 840 square miles of our treasured landscape. But we've picked ourselves up and we're rebuilding, just like we always do. The lessons we've learned from the Wallow Fire will help us defend against similar mega fires in the future. Some of Arizona's forebears were the prospectors and the ranchers who gave up everything for a chance at a better life. Some were the adventurers and cowboys who thrived on freedom and danger. Some of us can trace our history directly back to the Spanish missionaries or to our long-standing dynamic Hispanic community that has so greatly influenced our distinctive culture and cuisine. And many of us are direct descendants of the very first Arizonans, the 21 great American Indian tribes that continue to teach us important lessons about working with rather than against the expansive natural beauty and danger that surrounds us. These are Arizona's founding fathers. While each has influenced our state in a unique way, all share these common traits: a strong sense of independence and a willingness to preserve against the odds. And that is, I believe, one of the reasons why Arizona has such outsized national influence compared to its relatively small size in population. Indeed, the fierce wind of independence that rolls across our desert landscape has propelled not one but two of our leaders to national political prominence in just the past few decades. We may not have had an Arizonan in the White House yet, but there are few states that can boast a single 20th century major party presidential nominee, let alone two, in our Barry Goldwater and John McCain. And my friends on the other side of the aisle will no doubt recall their very able Senate Majority Leader from Arizona, Ernest McFarland, and will also remember Representative Mo Udall and Senator Carl Hayden, who served an amazing 57 years in Congress, 42 of them in this chamber alone. To put that in perspective, that's longer than Arizona's senior senator and I have served in the Congress combined. Our state has both nurtured and welcomed respected jurists like William Rehnquist and Sandra Day O'Connor, world-renowned architects like Frank Lloyd Wright, entertainers like Waylon Jennings, Linda Ronstadt, and Glenn Campbell, even Stephanie Meyer, author of the Twilight series. And of course, I'd be remiss if I neglected Steven Spielberg. He too embraced Arizona's adventurous entrepreneurial spirit, turning his teenage movie-making hobby in Scottsdale and Phoenix into a multi-million-dollar Hollywood empire. Had he been born in another state, one without our Arizona spirit, would the world have known classics today like E.T. and Jaws? We may never know. One thing we do know, Mr. President, is that Arizona also gave rise to the Navajo Code Talkers. It's a shame more Americans are not aware of the Talkers' incredible story. Their official website puts it this way, and I quote, "It's a great American story that is still largely unknown. The story of a group of young Navajo men who answered the call of duty, who performed a service no one else could, and in the process became great warriors and patriots. Their unbreakable code saved thousands of lives and helped end World War II. Their code, of course, was the Navajo language. Some of these young men were simple sheep herders on Arizona's great Navajo reservation until our nation called them to serve. They did so with honor, Mr. President, and they became American heroes in the process. Without them, we may never have achieved victory in the Pacific Theater, and I'm proud to pay tribute to these warriors today. Arizona honors them, and every American owes the Code Talkers a debt of gratitude." These are just some of the many reasons why I'm proud to call myself an Arizonan. I was not born in Arizona. I became one by choice, and it was one of the most consequential decisions I ever made. I came as a young man to attend the University of Arizona. There I met my wife, Carol, and together we raised two children, both of whom, I'm proud to say, learned their 5 C's, I should say, from a very early age. I've not left Arizona since my days at the University of Arizona, nor do I think I ever would or could. There's something about the beauty that surrounds, the spirit that encompasses, the sun that paints the landscape every morning. There's something different about Arizona. And, Mr. President, I'm proud of that difference. We are a special people with a distinctive place in the American mosaic. I would like to offer my congratulations to our Governor, Jan Brewer, to my Arizona colleagues in the House and Senate, to my constituents throughout our state on this historic centennial anniversary.
President, I notice the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander.
I ask unanimous consent further proceedings on the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, it's my distinct privilege to speak along with Mr.
The
President.
senior senator from Arizona is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank you, Mr. President. It's my distinct privilege to join with my beloved friend John Kyle to speak in honor of the centennial anniversary of Arizona statehood. 100 years ago, on February 14, 1912, the state of Arizona was officially admitted to the Union, effectively completing the contiguous lower 48 states. Americans today recognize Arizona as the thriving center of the Sun Belt, known for its ability to attract businesses, manufacturing, and tourists from around the world. The Valley of the Sun alone supports about 4 million people, and our state capital, Phoenix, is the nation's 6th largest city. Compared to its humble beginnings, Arizona has enjoyed tremendous growth and productivity, but this wasn't always so. Arizona's history began over 10,000 years ago with the migration of early Native American tribes to the region. For centuries, the Anasazi, Hohokam, and other peoples flourished in the forested highlands and Sonoran desert lowlands. Many of the Indian tribes in Arizona today are the proud descendants of these ancient peoples. It wasn't until 1528, with the arrival of Spanish missionaries and conquistadors in the towns of Tubac and Tucson, that the land and people were first reshaped. Spanish colonization eventually gave way to Mexican independence in 1821, and in 1848 the Mexican-American War concluded, with Mexico ceding much of Arizona to the United States. In 1853, President Franklin Pierce saw an opportunity to build a transcontinental railroad connecting the South to Southern California and purchased the remaining bottom half of the Arizona Territory from Mexico for $10 million, what today would be the equivalent of $244 million. It was around this time that American pioneers began to settle the towns of Prescott, Flagstaff, picturesque Sedona, and Yuma, and gateways to gold-rich California. During the Civil War, Arizona became a short-lived strategic interest to the Confederacy. The war's westernmost battle was fought in Arizona at Picacho Peak, about 50 miles north of Tucson. It reportedly lasted 90 minutes and involved about 25 soldiers. In the years that followed, cattlemen and mining speculators flocked to develop Arizona's natural resources in the towns like Tombstone, Bisbee, Show Low, and St. John's, the birthplace of our late and beloved Morris Udall. The boundaries of the state soon began to take shape thanks to explorers like John Wesley Powell, whose famous 3-month expedition down the mighty Colorado charted the first known passage through the Grand Canyon. Efforts in Congress to pass statehood began around the turn of the 20th century. One proposal sought to combine the territories of Arizona and New Mexico into one massive state. But Arizona settlers would have none of it, and it's unlikely the people of New Mexico were all too excited about the plan either. At the time, many outsiders didn't fully appreciate Arizona's untapped potential. They considered it nothing more than a desert wasteland, economically desolate and virtually uninhabitable. One of Arizona's first territorial representatives, Henry Ashurst, is known to have risen in Congress to argue, quote, "All that Arizona needs to flourish is good people and water," to which an East Coast member supposedly retorted, "You could say the same about hell." Arizonans eventually succeeded in convincing Congress to grant statehood. This was partially due to the construction of the Theodore Roosevelt Dam in 1903 as part of the Salt River Project in Phoenix, one of the nation's first federal reclamation projects. The Roosevelt Dam channeled life-giving water from the Salt River into a series of irrigation canals that overlay a canal network dug by the Hohokam Indians more than 1,000 years prior. Fueled by irrigation water and hydroelectric power, the small community of Phoenix, which started as a cavalry hay camp at Fort McDowell, began its rise to national prominence. Mr. President, my predecessor in the United States Senate, the late Senator Barry Goldwater, is among Arizona's most celebrated statesmen, having served 5 terms in this body. He was born in Phoenix when Arizona was still a territory and witnessed remarkable changes to the Grand Canyon state throughout his lifetime. The Smithsonian Magazine recently republished an op-ed Goldwater wrote in 1962 called Arizona's Next 50 Years, where he imagines what Arizona would look like by 2012. Keep in mind that Arizona had barely 1 million people living across the entire state in the 1960s. Modern air conditioning technology was relatively new, and the 1,500 miles of interstate crisscrossing the state today was still on the drawing board. Yet Goldwater correctly predicted our rapid population growth comparing Phoenix to other major U.S. cities. I'd like to share some of his predictions with you. He wrote, "It will be the deserts that will support the majority of the new homes. Phoenix will have a population of about 3 million. And Tucson will grow to about 1.5 million. Phoenix and Tucson will remain the 2 largest cities in the state, with Phoenix being either the 4th or 6th largest city in the United States. The growth of Glendale, Peoria, and Avondale will parallel that of Phoenix proper, so that 50 years from now, all of these cities will be contiguous with each other and with Phoenix, and will form a city complex not unlike the present city of Los Angeles." Mr. President, anyone who's flown into Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport can see from the sky, day or night, the infinite grid-like layout of the Metro Phoenix area. Senator Goldwater understood that this kind of development would fundamentally alter how Arizonans relate to the desert, writing, and I quote, The man of 2012 would not be able to walk from his doorstep into this pastel paradise with its saguaro, the mesquite, the leap of a jackrabbit, or the smell of freshly wet greasewood, because people will have transgressed on the desert for home site to accommodate a population of slightly over 10 million people. The forests will be protected as well as our parks and monuments, but even they will have as neighbors the people who today enjoy hardships to visit them. Despite the challenges of increased demand on our natural resources, Senator Goldwater correctly believed that the state would mature into a modern, industrious economy with global connections. He said, Arizona's principal economic growth will be in the industrial field, with emphasis being on items of a technological nature. It will not be many years before industry will become an important part of the economies of most Arizona cities, whereas today it is more or less confined to a few. Arizona will continue to be the haven for people who seek an outlet for initiative and a reward for work. The frontier challenges will exist then as they do today, for man's progress never stops unless man stops it. Fortunately for our state, our men have always and will always want to go forward, not backward. So what is Arizona today? Arizona's open skies and fair climate offer the U.S. military an ideal training environment for our soldiers and high-tech combat systems. Luke Air Force Base outside of Phoenix will be home to the F-35 fighter jet, the most advanced fighter in the world. The U.S. Army's Intelligence Center is located at Fort Huachuca in southern Arizona, where UAV training serves a unique and irreplaceable national security mission. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base near Tucson is the nation's premier A-10 Warthog base, hosts an array of special operations aircraft, and will hopefully continue to grow in support of our military's drone fleet. Across the highway, Arizonans in the Air National Guard fly the newest F-16s to train foreign pilots from over 20 countries. And virtually every Marine Corps fixed-wing squadron that participated in Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm underwent pre-deployment training at Yuma Marine Corps Station. Arizona is also home to nearly 600,000 veterans, many of whom have returned to their families and loved ones from Iraq and Afghanistan. More copper is mined in Arizona than all the other states combined, and the Morenci mine is the largest copper producer in all of North America. Two of the country's largest man-made lakes are in Arizona, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the result of Hoover Dam, which supplies drinking water to over 25 million people in Arizona, Nevada, and California. Yuma, Arizona, an industrial power and agriculture powerhouse, produces about 90% of the country's winter vegetables. The lettuce in your salad this month almost certainly came from Arizona. We operate the Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station, located about 55 miles west of Phoenix, which generates more electricity than any other power plant in the nation. It's home to three major state universities, Arizona State University, the University of Arizona, and Northern Arizona University, with an undergraduate and graduate population of over 130,000. Arizona is a leader in manufacturing information, medical, and defense technologies. We're headquarters to TGen, the Translational Genomic Research Institute, which conducts cutting-edge genetic research with the goal of curing Alzheimer's, autism, Parkinson's, and numerous forms of cancer. We support critical scientific endeavors to discover our place in the universe. Arizona's unique landscapes, like Meteor Crater in the Painted Desert, once played a key role in the NASA Apollo training missions. The world's largest solar telescope is located at Kitt Peak National Observatory in Sells, Arizona. The University of Arizona is actively involved in the Cassini, Mars Lander, and Mars Rover missions, as well as NASA's OSIRIS-REx mission, which will be the first spacecraft to land on an asteroid and return a sample to Earth. It's also believed that the chimichanga has its origin in Arizona, although its exact hometown is still a matter of vigorous historical debate amongst locals. Mr. President, I'm immensely proud of Arizona's rich history, and I'm humbled to represent a state that has earned a special place in the American consciousness. Even when I travel overseas, it's seldom that I meet an individual who doesn't know where the Grand Canyon is, or isn't captivated by the tales of the Old West, or doesn't admire the rugged individualism of Arizona's frontiersmen. I can't presume to exercise the kind of predictive abilities that Senator Goldwater displayed in his article. All I can say is that Arizona's future is perhaps best prophesized by reflecting on our legacy, judging our achievements against our intrepid beginnings. For as long as Arizona stays true to the pioneer spirit, I believe her best days are yet to come. Mr. President, if I might ask the indulgence for just to read a very short piece that I put in the foreword to a book. It's a wonderful book by Lisa Schneble Heidinger, Arizona 100 Years Grand, the official book of Arizona Centennial. Near the end of his life, Barry Goldwater tried to describe to an interviewer his affection for Arizona. He started to identify some of the many of the natural wonders so beloved by Arizonans when he became emotional. Arizona, he proclaimed, is 113,400 square miles of heaven that God cut out. Fighting back tears and unable to continue at length, he managed only to add, "I love it so much." For much of my life, I had been rootless. My father was a naval officer, and my childhood was an itinerant one as we moved from one base to another more times than I can enumerate. Following in his footsteps, I too made my home in the United States Navy, and the only place I lived for more than a year or two was unexpectedly a lengthy stay in a foreign country that would not let me leave and would have preferred I had never come. Except for that period of involuntary residence, I had always lived my life on the move, part of a tradition that compensated me in other ways for the hometown it denied me. I had no connection to one place, no safe harbor where I could rest without care. Landscapes and characters all pass too quickly to form the attachments of shared history and love that calm your heart when age finally cages your restlessness. I was nearly 45 years old before I could claim a hometown. My ambitions brought me to Arizona, and my work keeps me away from here for more than half my time. But Arizona has given me a home, and in the 30 years that have passed since I moved here, it has worked its magic on me and enchanted me and claimed me. In those 30 years, I've been to almost every community that Arizonans carved from the wilderness and made thrive, places that have never stopped growing, and places where opportunities were exhausted and were abandoned to history, and places that rose and declined and were reimagined and made to prosper again by the hardworking, self-starting dreamers Arizona attracts in such large numbers. I've marveled at the resourcefulness and vision of generations of Arizonans in Yuma and Page, Jerome, Kingman, Bisbee, and Flagstaff, who knew success and failure, who struggled, achieved, lost, and struggled again to build from their freedom and opportunities in the challenging and beautiful places that had won their hearts, strong, prospering, and decent communities. At the end of every election, I've stood on the courthouse steps in Prescott, our old territorial capital, and thought of the pioneering families whose names still resonate in contemporary public affairs like Udall and Goldwater. I look at the Bucky O'Neill Monument, that memorial to the Rough Riders, of whom he was among the roughest and bravest, and remember the names of Arizonans of every station and walk of life who risked everything so that the freedom Arizonans cherish so dearly and make such a good use of would be birthright of all. Names like Frank Luke and Ira Hayes, Lori Piestawa, and Pat Tillman. I've experienced every scene of spectacular beauty this blessed, bountiful, beautiful state possesses. I've hiked canyon to shade, Chiricahua, rim to rim in the greatest of our natural wonders, the Grand Canyon. I've rafted down the Colorado. I've walked the trails of Saguaro National Park, been struck mute by the awe-inspiring landscape of Monument Valley, and spent countless happy hours following hidden paths in our wilderness areas. I've houseboated on Lake Powell. Many times I've driven through the desert in spring after a wet winter and felt myself become emotional as I marveled at the profusion of vivid colors, the mesmerizing beauty of desert wildflowers in bloom. We have a home between Cottonwood and Sedona, to where my family escapes whenever, whenever we have the chance. It's on a bend of Oak Creek, surrounded by hills, a ghost ranch and Indian caves, adorned by fruit orchards and roses, and shaded by tall cottonwoods and sycamores. So many species of birds make their home there, I've lost count of them. Common blackhawks return annually to their nest in the sycamore beneath which I drink my morning coffee and give thanks for the blessing of living in such natural splendor. I've never in my life loved a place more, and when my public life is over, I will spend the remainder of my days there giving thanks and enjoying the happiness of belonging to some place so beautiful, smaller and more intimate than a nation that spans a continent. The state of Arizona is at its centennial. 100 years of audacious and difficult undertakings, of dreams won and lost and sought again, of progress and struggle and resilience. It's a rough and tumble history, colorful, heroic, bold, and inspiring, like the character of the people who made it. You'll see it celebrated appropriately in the splendid book that I referred to earlier. And you'll glimpse the future that today's Arizonans, the dreamers and risk-takers, lovers of freedom, captivated by the stunning landscapes and resilient, enterprising communities that have worked their magic on them, will build. It will be a future worthy of our predecessors' achievements and legacies, a future of adversity overcome and opportunities for all. We will change, as all places do. Others will come, as I once came, to make a new home or find the only home that they ever really had in towns and cities and rural communities that will be better for their presence and contributions. They will face the challenges of their time and experience unexpected setbacks, but they will stick with it, work harder, dream bigger, and prevail. And 100 years from now, their history, character, and accomplishments will inspire their fortunate descendants and the newcomers who will come here to live in beauty and make the most of their lives. We will change, but the values and beauty we treasure will remain intact. Arizona is 113,400 square miles of heaven that God cut out, and Arizonans mean to keep it so. We love it that much.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, I came to the floor to, along with Senator Collins, to introduce the Cybersecurity Act of 2012, but I must thank my friends, my colleagues, dear friends and colleagues from Arizona for an extra bonus in hearing their really rhapsodic and moving tribute to their state on its centennial, statements of real love and loyalty. Having spent some fair amount of time in Arizona, I can say that every word they said is a word of truth. And I congratulate them and wish them and all the people of Arizona a joyous centennial celebration. Mr. President, I did come to the floor to introduce the Cybersecurity Act of 2012. I'm here with Senator Collins. I want to thank her for all the work that we've done together in what has been a wonderfully bipartisan, nonpartisan relationship to deal with a very serious national problem. I'm very honored that we are joined in introducing this bill by the chairs of the two committees that have been most involved in the questions of cybersecurity, the chairman of the Commerce Committee, Senator Rockefeller, and the chair of the Intelligence Committee of the Senate, Senator Feinstein of California. We've also had the involvement of the chairs and others on the Foreign Relations Committee and the Judiciary Committee and the Energy Committee, but I'm very proud that this is a bill that Senator Collins and I, Senator Rockefeller, and Senator Feinstein introduced today. I also want to give a particular thanks to the Majority Leader, Senator Reid, for his unflagging support based on his personal concern about America's cyber defenses based on classified briefings he's received on this problem. He really pushed us to work together across party and committee lines to pull the bill together that we're introducing today. It's interesting to note, since there's been a lot of commentary in the last 24 hours about President Obama's budget, that President Obama has recognized in the most tangible terms the danger that confronts us by recommending adding at least $300 million in the coming year to our cybersecurity efforts. Still, Mr. President, I know while it's February 14th, 2012, those of us who've worked on this problem fear that when it comes to protecting America from cyber attack, it may be September 10th, 2001 all over again. And the question is whether America will confront this grave threat to our security before it happens, before our enemies attack. We are being bled of our intellectual property every day by cyber thieves, and the consequences of their thievery are very real to America's economy, our prosperity, and indeed our capacity to create jobs and hold the ones we have. Enemies probe the weaknesses every day in our critical national assets, waiting until the time is right through cyber attack to cripple our economy or attack, for instance, a city's electric grid with the touch of a key on the other side of the world. The fact is that our cyber defenses are not what they should be, but such as they are blinking red. And yet again, I fear we will not be able to connect the dots to prevent a 9/11 type cyber attack on America before it happens. The aim of this bill is to make sure that we don't scramble here in Congress after such an attack to do what we can and should do today. Intellectual property worth billions of dollars has already been stolen, given our international competitors access in the global marketplace without ever having to invest a dime in research. And the fact is that even the most sophisticated companies are being penetrated, and our adversaries are using information learned in one intrusion to plan the next more sophisticated one. Last year, the computer security firm McAfee conducted a study of 70 specific instances of data theft and then issued a report on those instances, and they included 13 defense contractors, 6 industrial plants, and 8 American and Canadian government networks. Based on that report, the former Vice President of McAfee, Dmitry Alperovich, issued this warning. "I am convinced," he wrote, "that every company in every conceivable industry with significant size and valuable intellectual property and trade secrets has been compromised, or will be shortly, with the great majority of the victims rarely discovering the intrusion or its impact." In fact, Alperovich concluded, "I divide the entire set of Fortune Global 2000 firms into 2 categories, those that know they've been compromised and those that don't yet know." End of quote. Mr. President, these examples, of course, are deeply alarming, but in addition, lurking out in the ether are computer worms like Stuxnet that can commandeer the computers that control heavy machinery and potentially allow an intruder to open and close valves and switches in pipelines, refineries, factories, water and sewer systems, and electric plants in our country without detection by their operators. I mean, obviously, this capacity could be used by an enemy to attack our country and do damage not only comparable to 9/11, but far in excess of it. Depending on the target or targets, these kinds of cyber attacks could lead to terrible physical destruction, massive loss of life, massive evacuations, and of course widespread economic disruption. Owners of these critical systems, that is private sector owners, remember most of cyber infrastructure in America is privately owned, and that's what this bill is talking about. Owners have sometimes told us that we don't need to worry about the security of their systems because they're not connected to the Internet. But the reality today is that that is simply not correct. The experts have told us that a truly air-gapped system, as they call it, that is one not connected to the Internet, is as rare as a blizzard in the Caribbean. If it exists, our best cyber experts have yet to see it. And Stuxnet has showed us that it doesn't matter if a system is air-gapped, because one thumb drive plugged into a computer can lead to an infection that spreads. Mr. President, if we don't act now to secure our computer network sometime in the future, and I believe it will be in the near future, we will be forced to act in the middle of a mega cyber crisis, or right after one that has had enormous, perhaps catastrophic effects on our country. That's why we introduced this bill, and that's why we look forward to the debate on it, and why we hope it will pass and be enacted before a cyber catastrophe occurs in America. Now, let me just briefly describe some of the important things this bill does. First, it ensures that the computer systems, private systems that control our most critical infrastructure that are currently not secure are made secure. Our bill defines critical infrastructure narrowly to include those systems that, if brought down or commandeered in a cyber attack, would lead to mass casualties, evacuations of major population centers, the collapse of financial markets, or degradation of our national security. This is really critical infrastructure. After identifying the precise systems that meet that definition of high risk, the Secretary of Homeland Security would, under our legislation, then work with the private sector operators of those systems to develop cybersecurity performance requirements based on risk assessments of those sectors. The private sector owners would then have some flexibility to meet those performance requirements with hardware or software they choose, so long as it achieves the required level of security. The Department of Homeland Security will not be picking technological winners and losers. So there's nothing in this bill that would stifle innovation. In fact, I think quite the contrary. If a company can show that it already has met high security standards, it will be exempt from these requirements. The bill focuses on securing that which is not secured today, not on putting new requirements on industries that are doing everything they should be doing to protect themselves and our national security. Mr. President, once these improved security systems come online, I think that many companies will want to apply them to non-critical systems that are not covered by this bill as a way to protect the privacy of their employees and customers, as well as giving these companies the chance to offer secure e-commerce services. But that will be up to each company. This bill also seeks to make compliance easier, more rational for covered critical infrastructure operators by creating a more streamlined and efficient cyber organization within the Department of Homeland Security. And at each step in the process created by our bill, the Department of Homeland Security must work with existing federal regulators and the private sector that they regulate to ensure that no rules or regulations are put in place that duplicate or conflict with existing requirements. And if a company feels that the designation of its networks as critical infrastructure is somehow wrong, it's got the right to appeal that decision through a system that the law requires DHS to set up, or they can go to federal district court. This bill also establishes mechanisms for information sharing between the private sector and the federal government and among the private sector operators themselves. Senator Feinstein and her committee made a significant contribution to this part of our bill. This is important because computer security experts in the private and public sectors need to be able to share information, compare notes in order to protect us against the evolving cyber threat. Our proposal also creates appropriate security measures and oversight to protect privacy and preserve civil liberties. In fact, I was pleased to read recently that the American Civil Liberties Union said it had studied our bill and that it found that it offers the greatest privacy protections of all the cybersecurity legislation that has been proposed. I'm going to jump forward a little bit so I can yield to my distinguished ranking member in a moment. I've discussed some of the things the bill does. I want to mention two that it doesn't do. One myth about this bill is that it contains a kill switch that would allow the President of the United States in an emergency to seize control of the Internet. Not. There is nothing remotely like that in this bill. At one time, we had considered language that would in fact have limited powers the President has under the Communications Act of 1934 to take over electronic communications in times of war. But that provision was so widely misunderstood or misrepresented that we dropped it, rather than risk losing the chance to pass the rest of this urgently needed legislation. I also want to make clear that nothing in this bill touches on any of the issues that quite recently have inflamed our consideration of the Stop Online Privacy Act, SOPA, or the Protect IP Act, known as PIPA. Many members of the Chamber have, metaphorically speaking, scars to still show from that experience. No need to fear this bill. This bill does nothing to affect the day-to-day workings of the Internet. Internet privacy and copyright protection are important concerns of the digital age. We have to deal with that at some point, but they're simply not part of this bill. One final thing I do want to deal with is a complaint from, among others, our Chamber of Commerce that we are, quote, rushing forward with legislation that's not been fully vetted. Not true. This bipartisan legislation has been 3 years in the making, and its outlines have not only been shared with stakeholders and the public, but their input has helped shape this final version of the bill that we're introducing today. More than 20 hearings on cybersecurity have been held across 7 different Senate committees, with dozens more held on questions related to cybersecurity. In fact, our own committee, since 2005, has held 9 hearings on the subject, and we'll hold another one this Thursday where we will hear reactions to this bill. I'm very pleased to say that Senator Reid continues to be very committed to seeing us do everything we can to adopt legislation to protect our American cyber systems. I believe it's the leader's intent to bring this bill up in the next work period. I hope so, because the truth is that time is not on our side. We are not adequately protected at this moment, and the capabilities of those who are attacking us for economic reasons or to prepare to attack us for strategic reasons just grows larger and larger. I do want to say that we have a growing number of companies in the private sector, information technology, cybersecurity, and other companies in critical infrastructure areas that are coming to support this bill. Two that I want to mention here are Cisco and Oracle, which gives you some sense of the range of support for the bill. Bottom line, I think this is a subject around which we should have a good, healthy debate, an open amendment process, and a bipartisan agreement, because this is all about not regulation. It's about our most fundamental national economic security and public safety. With that, I yield the floor to my distinguished ranking member, the senator from Maine.
Mr. President,
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I do rise today to introduce, with the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Senator Lieberman, as well as Senator Rockefeller and Senator Feinstein, the Cyber Security Act of 2012. As always, it's been a great pleasure to work with my friend and colleague from Connecticut on what I believe is the most important initiative that we've come together on, perhaps since our 2004 Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act. I'm also delighted that 3 Senate chairmen who have significant jurisdiction in this area, Senator Lieberman, Senator Rockefeller, and Senator Feinstein, have come together. We've all worked very hard on this bill. I also want to commend the staff of our committee, which has worked extraordinarily hard over several years to produce this bill. Our legislation would provide the federal government and the private sector with the tools necessary to protect our most critical infrastructure from growing cyber threats. Earlier this month, the FBI Director, Robert Mueller, warned that the cyber threat will soon equal or surpass the threat from terrorism. He argued that we should be addressing the cyber threat with the same intensity that we have applied to the terrorist threat. The Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, made the point even more strongly. He described the cyber threat as, quote, a profound threat to this country, to its future, its economy, its very being, end quote. These warnings are just the latest in a chorus of warnings from current and former officials. Last November, the director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, warned that malicious cyber attacks threaten a growing number of the systems with which we interact each and every day: the electric grid, our water treatment plants, key financial systems. Similarly, General Keith Alexander, the commander of U.S. Cyber Command and the director of the National Security Agency, has warned that the cyber vulnerabilities we face are extraordinary and characterized by, quote, a disturbing trend from exploitation to disruption to destruction, end quote. Mr. President, as Senator Lieberman has pointed out, the threat is not only to our national security, but also to our economic well-being. A study by the company Norton last year calculated the cost of global cybercrime at $114 billion annually. When combined with the value of time that victims lost due to cybercrime, this figure grows to $388 billion globally, which Norton described as significantly more than the global black market in marijuana, cocaine, and heroin combined. In an op-ed last month titled China's Cyber Thievery is National Policy and Must Be Challenged, former DNI Mike McConnell, former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff, and former Deputy Secretary of Defense William Lind noted the ability of cyber terrorists to cripple our critical infrastructure. And they sounded an even more urgent alarm about the threat of economic cyber espionage. Citing an October 2011 report to Congress by the Office of the National Counterintelligence Executive, they warned of the catastrophic impact that cyber espionage, particularly that pursued by China, could have on our economy and our competitiveness. They estimated that the cost easily means billions of dollars and millions of jobs. This threat is all the more menacing because it is being pursued by a global competitor seeking to steal the research and development of American firms to undermine our economic leadership. Mr. President, the evidence of our cybersecurity vulnerability is overwhelming and compels us to act. As the chairman has mentioned, since 2005, our Homeland Security Committee has held 9 hearings on the cyber threat. In 2010, Chairman Lieberman, Senator Carper, and I introduced our cybersecurity bill, which was reported by the committee later that same year. Since last year, we've been working with Chairman Rockefeller to merge our bill with legislation he has championed, which was reported by the Commerce Committee. Lately, after incorporating changes based on the feedback of our colleagues, the private sector, and the administration, we have produced a new version which we introduced today. Now, Mr. President, some of our colleagues have urged us to focus very narrowly on the Federal Information Security Management Act, as well as on federal research and development and improved information sharing. We do need to address those issues, and our bill does address those important issues. And again, like Senator Lieberman, I want to commend Senator Feinstein for her contributions in the area of improved information sharing, and Senator Carper for the work that he has done on the Federal Information Security Management Act. But the fact remains, Mr. President, that with 85% of our nation's critical infrastructure owned by the private sector, government also has a critical role in ensuring that the most vital parts of that critical infrastructure, those whose disruption could result in truly catastrophic consequences, such as mass casualties or mass evacuations, meet reasonable, risk-based performance standards. In an editorial this week, the Washington Post concurred, writing that our critical systems have remained unprotected. To accept the status quo would be an unacceptable risk to U.S. national security. Mr. President, the Post got it exactly right. Now, some of our colleagues are skeptical about the need for any new regulations. Mr. President, there's no one who's worked harder than I have to oppose regulations that would unnecessarily burden our economy and cost us jobs. But we need to distinguish between regulations that hurt our economy and are not necessary and hinder our international competitiveness versus regulations that are necessary for our national security and that promote rather than hinder our economic prosperity. Those strengthen our economy and our nation. The fact is that the risk-based performance requirements in our bill are targeted carefully. They only apply to specific systems and assets, not entire companies, that if damage could reasonably be expected to result in mass casualties, huge evacuations, catastrophic economic damages, or a severe degradation of our national security. In other words, Mr. President, we are talking about truly catastrophic impacts. Moreover, the owners of critical infrastructure, not the government, would select and implement the cybersecurity measures the owners determined to be best suited to satisfy the risk-based cybersecurity performance requirements. Our new bill would also require the Secretary of Homeland Security to select among existing industry practices and standards or choose performance requirements proposed by the private sector. Lots of collaboration and consultation. Only if none of these mitigates the risks identified through this public-private collaboration could the Secretary propose something different. That is extremely unlikely to happen. The bill prohibits the regulation of the design and development of commercial IT products. It would require that existing requirements and current regulators be used wherever possible. The bill would allow federal officials to waive the bill's requirements when existing regulations or security measures are already sufficiently robust. As with our earlier versions of this bill, companies in substantial compliance with the performance requirements at the time of a cyber incident would receive liability protection from any punitive damages associated with an incident, giving them an incentive to comply. Mr. President, the fact remains that improving cybersecurity is absolutely essential. We cannot afford to wait for a cyber 9/11 before taking action. The warnings could not be clearer about the vulnerabilities and the threat to our systems. Every day, every single day, nation-states, terrorist groups, cyber criminals, hackers probe our systems both in the public and the private sectors. And they have been successful over and over again in their intrusions. We don't want to look back after a catastrophic cyber event and say, why didn't we act? How could we have ignored all of these warnings? So I would encourage our colleagues to continue to work with us and to come together and enact this vitally needed legislation. Thank you, Ms.